Today's episode is pure summer nostalgia. Picture this: the creak of a wooden boardwalk, the scent of salt air and warm fudge, a box of taffy tucked under your arm. We're headed to Ocean City, New Jersey, where Shriver's has been delighting families since 1898. Joining me is Meryl Vangelov, who lovingly stewards her family's legacy as the current keeper of this iconic candy shop. In this conversation, we talk about the magic of memories, what it means to carry on a century-old business, and why some flavors never go out of style. It's a celebration of Americana, heirloom confections, and the stories and recipes we pass down with every sweet bite. Welcome to Grandma's Silver, where tradition meets today. I'm Allie, your host of the Grandma's Silver podcast and founder of the Grand Millennial Lifestyle. Here, we blend aesthetics with nostalgia, engaging in conversations with lifestyle brands, designers, and more to rediscover the timeless charm of the past. Join me as we journey from home to heart, illuminating the past and polishing the present with the gleam of Grandma's Silver. Well, Meryl, I'm so excited to chat with you today. We're talking about a lot of fun things. I want to turn this over to you and just let you introduce yourself and explain who you are and your connection to Shriver's.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm Meryl Vangelov, and I am the owner of Shriver Saltwater Taffy and Fudge in Ocean City, New Jersey, along with my husband, Blue.
Family owned and operated.
Yes. We are the fourth generation, really, of candy makers. However, for Shriver's, it would be the third generation. Hopefully, we're going to be moving on to a fourth generation, and we just feel really blessed to be able to be part of the tradition that Shriver's is for a lot of people.
Now, let's talk about the setting for a moment, because that is actually quite significant. So, Ocean City, New Jersey, oldest business, did I read that right? Oldest business on the boardwalk?
Yes.
Do you know the date off the top of your head when it first opened?
Technically 1898, and I say that because the original building burnt down in 1927 and was built. As far as Shriver's, the name has been there since 1898.
Obviously, someone at some point decided to do this professionally, right? Or how did this launch? We're talking about the 1800s right now, but how did they decide to do this, and particularly on the boardwalk?
So family history is that my grandfather's father, so my great-grandfather, he was a candy maker in Germany. And we have a lot of recipes written in German still in our possession, which is really pretty cool. So he and his wife came over to the States. They had 4 boys. They actually had 7 children, but the boys wound up to be the ones to go into the candy making business, primarily because women were not really in the workplace at that time. I've heard in our family, women weren't really allowed in the business more because there wasn't enough to go around. There wasn't to be able to support everybody. So it was just kind of tiered down to the husband of the families. Whether or not that's really actual, I'm not sure. But in any case, it was for us. There were 4 boys that got involved in the candy making in Philadelphia. And actually, it was more than that. It was candy and it was ice cream and restaurants that were opened throughout Philadelphia. There were, I think in the end, about 13 stores. Some of them included restaurants and some did not. And at the time, ice cream molds were very, very popular. So they would be putting ice cream into molds. We do still display those ice cream molds as part of our history section. My grandfather was the last surviving brother, so kind of in a natural way became the owner of Shriver's. But he also was the owner of James and Frailinger's Saltwater Taffy in Atlantic City. So this is quite an expanse of family that were involved in the business, including my mother and uncle's cousin. He had Stutz's Candy. Everybody kind of spread out and found a business, named it, and a lot of them have been quite successful and still are names today. Shriver's was pre-existing as a name. The Shrivers family was a prominent family in Ocean City that owned a lot of real estate and businesses. And the Shrivers building was opened and named the Shrivers building. I'm not quite sure what the history of that is, but when my grandfather and his brothers purchased the business, they kept the name. It was part of the agreement. The other stores in Atlantic City, they were named James and Frounders because they were purchased with those names and they
Okay.
had already been established.
Before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about how you are a mom, you have children.
Yes.
They are kind of growing up in this business, and we can talk about that more if you want, but I have to imagine that might have also been your experience.
Absolutely, absolutely. Before my mom got into the business, she was working in a lab. And as my grandfather was becoming older, he was reaching out to my mother and my uncle. Now, there are three children. One of them is Virginia. That is my mother. There's Henry, that is her one brother, and there is Frank, that is her other brother. Now, Frank is the owner of James and Frounders and Bayard's Candies. And my mother and my uncle were the owners and operators of Shriver's in Ocean City up until 2010. I came into the business. I was introduced to the business at 8 years old. I always like to jokingly tell the story that later on I did work for the business in my early teens. I wasn't doing anything super crazy for the business, but I did get fired a couple of times. But clearly I kind of took that in stride and kept going and now I am where I am. I grew up very much around the candy business. My grandfather was at work all summer long, and it was always a huge treat when we were visiting my grandparents to be allowed to go to Shriver's in Ocean City to pick out a couple of pieces of candy. It was so magical, and I'm so fortunate, I feel, to have been able to experience that because I don't think my children were able to get that aspect of it. They were, kind of born into it. And at the time, there was a very big line between my grandfather being at work and being able to disturb him at work and the respect that we had to give that versus in my family with my children growing up around it was more of a home
Yeah.
and our employees are family. So everybody just kind of treated them as though they were, just the next person walking through. And that for me is extremely special to be able to have experienced a little bit of what some people experience at Shriver's with the nostalgia and the experience. I went off and did the college thing and came back into the family business in my late 20s and I've been there ever since.
I love that so much. Well, you touched on that as a child, it felt magical. I very much feel it's kind of like, and I was just recently there. I visited over Memorial Day weekend. We were with family in Ocean City, which is its own tradition, right? To visit the shore. And then we have our boardwalk traditions. You can smell it as you start to approach it. And then when you walk inside, it is like stepping into Willy Wonka's. It's just, it's very nostalgic. It's magical. There's so much, which I would love to talk about in a moment because the inventory, if you will, is incredible. It maintains sort of that, especially as the boardwalk evolves, right? It grounds you almost in that tradition.
Right. It's familiar, and I think that's what people are looking for when they are looking for tradition and an experience to go back to, right?
What do you think makes something like saltwater taffy, fudge, nostalgic in summary?
I don't think it was on purpose. In reality, the reason why saltwater taffy and fudge were made and kind of used as the treat of the summer was because there was no air conditioning back then. And chocolates were very big, but to keep chocolates in a non-air conditioning environment was just not practical. Although saltwater taffy can get very, very soft and sticky, it has to really be left in an environment that's either direct sunlight. And another thing about saltwater taffy is that depending on the time of year and temperature, you can cook it to different degrees to make sure that it stays a little harder or softer, which is something that we do.
Wow, I had no idea. I say that as if I know anything about taffy, but yeah, that's actually really fascinating.
Right, right. And sometimes we get caught up in Mother Nature because we change our cook for the season, and Mother Nature decides to change back what we've already cooked goes out on the shelf. And that's when we start to hear from people, oh, your soft, your taffy's a little soft or it's a little sticky. And that's the reason for it. And so we always tell people, you know what, just throw it into the refrigerator and pull it out and it will be fine. That is a really interesting aspect of saltwater taffy that kind of allowed them to keep it in the store without melting.
That's so interesting. Candy making in general is almost a pastime if we're talking about trade. Not that people aren't making candy, but it's very much like a high level manufacturing. Could you talk about what that looks like for you as a smaller family owned business?
We're able to, because we are smaller, we have a little bit more control. I would say that's the biggest thing. Because we're closer to the customers, literally, there's just a glass wall between the production and our store. We are able to get feedback. We're able to hear what customers want. We're able to see what customers are doing with our candy. And I say that because one of our products that was developed, which was our twisted taffy, was developed because we were watching people take the saltwater taffy, unwrap maybe two or three flavors, and twist them together and make their own flavors. We thought to ourselves, well, wait, why aren't we doing that? So there's that element of kind of just being a step closer to your customer that allows you to change your product or add on, make new flavors, things like that. When you have a big production room, I think it's pretty closed off and they're trying to get a certain number out. And although we do that, and we do have to do that, things are a little bit more relaxed, I guess, is maybe a way to say it. We also still pack all of our boxes by hand. All of our boxes are packed by hand, which also gives us a little bit more hands-on to feel the product if it's too soft or if we're seeing that the wrap isn't correct.
I know you're producing year round, but this is your busy season, right? So, like, how much are you producing daily, weekly, like, however whatever your metric or like your measure is there? Because there's so much. I mean, you always have stocked shelves.
We do, we do. We try to do that. We have 3 stores that we have to stock as well. So
Yeah.
we are producing a lot. I'll give you an idea. So our machines, they can run more, but they run about 300 pieces a minute. We run 50 pounds. That takes about 10 to 15 minutes to run through and we'll produce about 2,000 pieces at the end. We do that all day and through the night. And that is part of what people come to see Shrivers for. They come to watch the candy being made, but I think they maybe disconnect or forget the fact that we're really producing the products that are going out on the shelves.
Yeah.
So it is extremely fresh.
At the time that you were a child visiting, right? Like it was probably, I don't want to make assumptions, but I think it was likely already machines involved. At
Mhm.
what point were they shifting their practices? Because it had to have started without machines, yes? 1800s?
I believe that the pulling machines, which pull the candy, came in later, or at least for us, they did. The wrapping machines, I believe, were, although we attained them in the 1950s, may have been used, and I'm sure were used in other countries, particularly in England, which is where the machines come from prior to that. But I know that our machines are from the 1950s. Not sure of the date, But prior to that, they were making it with a hook, or pulling it with a hook, I should say, and they were wrapping it by hand. The process was interesting. They had a hook that was on the wall. It looked just almost like an oversized fishing hook, and they would wrap the taffy around that hook and almost let it fall while giving it a little pull at the same time. And then they'd wrap it back over the hook and pull it again. And that was the process that was used by hand. Later, there was a machine that was brought in, and we call it the puller. So that you can also see through our windows in the store. And that's where the taffy is aerated there, and it creates a chewy product. Before that, you would put a piece of taffy in your mouth and it will just stick to your teeth. That process allows the air to be brought into it and made into a chewy product.
Okay, since we're on this, could you talk a little bit more about the process? Because I'm sure I'm not the only one who has absolutely no idea what this looks like on the back end of how start to finish. Like what, I mean, I know you mentioned your grandfather or well, greats at this point, but there were recipes that came over. So are you working, I guess, first of all, are you working from any of those original recipes, understanding that now with the introduction of machines and different ingredients, things might have changed a little at some point?
The relevance of the recipes of my great grandfather may not be as much for fudge. Yes. And marzipan, I know, was a recipe that was being shared. I'm not sure what some of them were in German. So not some, a lot were in German. So I really can't speak to what the recipes were for. But saltwater taffy was not one of them. Saltwater taffy was created by a man, as far as the story goes, in Atlantic City. Now, I'm sure it was not created by him, but the story of why saltwater taffy got its name was that a man named Mr. Bradley was making saltwater taffy in Atlantic City, and he was selling it off of a stand on the beach. The current came up and washed over his product one day, and a little girl asked him if she could have some of his saltwater taffy, which then kind of became coined saltwater taffy because his wife, Mr. Bradley's wife, overheard that and thought it was a great marketing. So it was great marketing for the product. So they called it saltwater taffy after that. The James brothers were calling their product saltwater taffy and wanted to copyright it. Now, here I'm going to tell you the story, but I'm not 100% on my information. But James Candy was making saltwater taffy, and they wanted to copyright saltwater taffy, and they went to court to do it. It was released. They would not allow them to copyright the name. So it is allowed to be called saltwater taffy everywhere. But prior to that, it was probably just being called taffy. And I'm sure there were a lot of different types of it, just like there are today, because we have, different types of products of taffy. There's, some with different additives in them than others, and it just creates a slightly different product. So the first part of the process is that it goes into the cooking stage. There are two essentially copper kettles on top of each other. One is the cook and the other is the vacuum. So after it's cooked, it gets vacuumed. And the reason for that is that it pulls the moisture out of the product. That then, as a liquid form, is poured into bins. Those bins are taken to what we call the hot room, which is basically a temperature controlled room. If we didn't do that and we left it out, it would just turn into a brick. So we do have to keep it kind of warm when it's ready, when it's cooled enough. Then we take it to the cold tables, and the cold tables help it cool down. That's where we can add some color and flavorings. From that point, we take it to the cooler. And that's where, as I was saying earlier, we aerate it. It becomes a chewy product, which at that point is moved over to the wrapping machines. We make about 50 pounds, but we can make 100 pounds if we're short on a flavor. So you can imagine picking up and dropping and not dropping, but picking up and moving this product all day long, it's quite a feat. So we have to have some pretty strong people back there. I'm going to toot my own horn and say that I did do that for quite a while. My family, or my uncle really, who was overseeing the factory portion, my mother was more of the office and my uncle was more of the factory, insisted when I came into the business that I make everything and that I knew how to make everything. It's all really interesting. I had a great time doing it.
You touched on this, but I just want to make sure we address it. So the name Saltwater Taffy, there is not, which I'm sure you get this question constantly, right? But it is just the byproduct of that tail. It is not actually an ingredient in the product.
Correct. There is no salt in saltwater taffy.
Since we're on taffy,
Okay.
how many flavors do you have right now?
I always kind of do a vagueness on this only because we add flavors and take away flavors based on season. You know, sometimes we'll take away a flavor because it's not super popular. We're trying it out. So in other words, we add flavors. We do trial and error around 70 plus flavors. And that is more or less in the summertime.
You have them all lined down, I guess, the middle of the store, right?
Yes.
It is the coolest thing to see. First of all, I would argue it's pretty because it's just so fun. They're so colorful, but I really had to fight the urge. I mean, I was just walking around like looking at each different flavor. And that said, what's the creative process behind figuring these flavors out?
Some of it has to do with customer suggestion. Some of it is just, let's just try this and see. Some of it is based on other product introductions. So new products that are introduced by other companies that kind of spark an idea with us. All of it is ideas flowing, availability of, flavors. So not always are you going to be able to find something that's available or that we could use. I know that at one point we have, you know what, I shouldn't say at one point, we still might have it. Pop Rocks, Saltwater Taffy. I don't want to pat myself too hard on the back, but I believe I was the one who said we should have that. And I wasn't really serious about it, but somebody listened and just made a batch of it. So that type of thing can happen. We've also had some pretty good failures. We tried some alcohol based, not that they had alcohol in them, but that they were alcohol flavors, and they went terribly. It just did not taste good at all. We've also made specialty flavors requested by certain people. That is extremely rare, but for really special occasions, we'll do it. We had a girl who we loved who passed away, and we made a flavor for her. There's a lot that goes into it, as you can tell. So
Understand. I mean, I know they rotate, but what are some of your more popular that have been around a while?
So originally there were 17 flavors, and that was because there really wasn't availability of flavors back then, of too many flavors. So 17 flavors, of course, were vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry. Those are still the staples. They're still the favorites. Those are the top three. I would say there's a good split too between the adult palate and the child's palate.
That is fair, yeah.
Yeah, so we do try to accommodate both. So, we have flavors like bubblegum, creamsicle, root beer. They tend to be more popular with teenagers and youngsters. And then, of course, the adults kind of gravitate more towards more mature flavors. I would even say there's not a whole lot of kids who love licorice or molasses. I always love finding one who does.
Let's segue a moment because you mentioned fudge, and I didn't want to not talk about that, especially as someone who always comes in for taffy and fudge. So, when was that introduced? Because I think you said it started with taffy exclusively, or did I get that wrong?
No, so Shriver's used to be in tune with kind of what the brothers were doing in Philadelphia with the ice cream parlor and the restaurants. Shriver's was a restaurant, and when my grandfather came in, they introduced the ice cream and the candy aspect. So it still remained a restaurant for a little while. The fudge was always part of the scene, probably even prior to Saltwater Taffy at the shore in the Philadelphia stores.
That process, how does that one look?
That one is not as complicated. It's really a cook and a pour and a cut.
And is the process as far as, because again, lots of flavors, lots
Mhm.
of options, lots of mix-ins, if you will. So is that process similar in that you just kind of get to be creative and try things out?
Yes, we have expanded our flavor options with fudge as well over the years. Again, have taken some out because popularity, change of palate. We've added in things like Snickers flavor, which is one of my favorites. The peanut butter variations are always a favorite. We have just plain peanut butter, we have chocolate peanut butter, and then we have Reese's, where you have the Reese's little Reese's on top.
Gosh.
It's painfully delicious. So there are a lot of flavor options for the fudge as well.
Well, I can personally attest when we were there, we grabbed, I love caramel in general, but this pregnancy especially, sea salt caramel has just hit the spot. So I think it might have been sea salt caramel as the flavor. It might be called something slightly different, but we grabbed that. Delicious. And then we wanted to try sort of like a less traditional flavor. So I think it was a strawberries and cream.
Okay.
Did I make that up? I think that's a real one. That was super good too. So yeah, lots of fun. And I think as a consumer, it's really fun to get to look at the creativity that goes into the flavor selection and just being kind of astounded at the counter, right? I think that's part of the magic of being a consumer in the shop.
Part of the whole experience is the fun of it, and that we try to keep that alive as much as we possibly can, as well as the nostalgia for people, what they experienced when they were young and what they're experiencing now. There's products that we still have that I remember when I came with my grandfather that I was picking up, and we still have them in the store today.
Kind of going off of that, because a big part of tradition is it being passed down, right? And it being carried forward. You talked about how your kids have kind of grown up in this situation, right? Like it wasn't a special visit per se, but it's very much a part of their lives.
Very much part of their lives. They were literally born into it. I think I left 3 days after I gave birth. Not for too long, not for too long, but I went to work. As soon as they were in my baby carriage, I was bringing them in. So they really grew up there. Now my oldest is working there. He's been loving it. He's every summer comes in and he works. My youngest is my candy eater. So, and he definitely works, but he's a taste tester too. So he loves that. He's always had the sweet tooth. My husband has a huge sweet tooth, which helps a lot for quality control. I'm always seeing him picking up candy and ice cream and eating it and testing it out, making sure it's good. So we really are a family business. It is an extremely difficult but amazing experience at the same time. I really feel blessed to be able to have that as part of our lives and to be able to have introduced it to my children and to be able to introduce business to my children, because they really have had their nose in everything, even past the good smells, to understand how things work and to have overheard our conversations between my husband and I, which are many, many, many conversations all day long about business.
I was also going to ask you, kind of on that tradition topic and nostalgia, your branding and your packaging is just so classic Americana. It's classic beach. You obviously see the nostalgic elements in your brand. So what does that all mean to you? What made you want to carry that through in your packaging and your marketing?
Some of it was already there when I came into the business. When my mom and my uncle came into the business, the packaging was there. There was also my uncle who at one point brought in our family crest during the wartime to one of our packaging as kind of just a notation of family and unity. So even back then, I feel like there was a lot of information and sharing of marketing. I was lucky enough to have a background in art, so that coming into the business, the creative aspect for me is huge. It really is what drives me. The creativity and the point of nostalgia and giving people back what they kind of expect. I want to give people the opportunity to continue the tradition because I feel like that's kind of our responsibility. We try to keep things as authentic as we can to the brand and to also at the same time balance keeping our brand current. And that is a challenge, but we look at things as a whole, our
Hmm.
packaging, we look at our product as far as palette, we look at our store as far as what we're presenting ourselves, how we're presenting ourselves, and trying to be able to bring in the nostalgia and also attract what children and teenagers are looking for in a product. That for me is a wonderful challenge, and it's actually something that my oldest son is going to school for. He's going to school for food marketing, so
Oh, neat.
I'm going to pull some into that too. It's a really interesting part of running a business. For me, it's always been a driving factor of what I want to do and why I want to do it.
You kind of addressed it already, so I won't ask it, but I was curious about, what it looks like to kind of be like the steward of or the custodian of of this legacy, but then still appeal to a modern audience, which I feel like you did just address really beautifully. One of the other things I did want to ask you, though, kind of going off of that, is because it's not just your tradition, but it is also the tradition of many who visit. And because you are very front facing and around your clients regularly, are there stories that you hear or people who get to talk to you about what that means to them?
So many stories. We take phone orders. We get a lot of people who don't, they're older individuals who don't use computers and they still want to order their saltwater taffy or they want to have it shipped to somebody as a gift. They call and we just talk to them for a long time just about their experience and how things were. And it's so cool. We also have a lot of emails, people sharing their stories with us. Military, that is,
Oh, yeah, I didn't think about that.
it's really amazing. We get pictures from military who received a package, and we've gotten letters from them, what it means to them. It's really special.
What keeps you personally inspired to keep the legacy going?
Family, my family tradition. My responsibility to my family, the traditions they started, the work they put in, the sacrifices they made. I know there were sacrifices by my grandfather. He didn't finish high school because
Wow.
he had to go to work. That aspect keeps me motivated. And then, of course, my family, my immediate family, and our relationship is built on top of this pillar. It kind of defines us in a lot of different ways. So we can't walk away from it. Work, the pillar will fall. So that is really what keeps us going.
Yeah. You mentioned location earlier in our conversation, and so I want to give you an opportunity before we wrap up here to tell people where they can physically find you.
You can find Shriver Saltwater Taffy in Ocean City, New Jersey, in Wildwood, and on Asbury Avenue in Ocean City, New Jersey.
Are the stores open year round or are they seasonal?
The only store that's not opened year round is Wildwood. Two Ocean City locations are open year round. When I tell you it is something else to be in the middle of a blizzard and I walk in the store and people are in there, it's really crazy and amazing. But I guess everybody needs their saltwater taffy even during a snowstorm.
Yep, add it to the bread, milk, and eggs, right?
Exactly.
I love it. And so then I assume also they could order online year round.
Absolutely.
And I didn't ask this earlier, and I meant to, but of course you have your flavors that you have right now, and I know they rotate. Do you do seasonal flavors?
We do. A lot of seasonal flavors have kind of filtered their way into year-round flavors because people get upset when you take them. Yes, we do. We do.
So I will throw this out there that I will, in the show notes of the episode, put social media links, website link. I can stick the locations in there for everybody. Well, Meryl, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. This was so much fun.
Well, thank you so much for including us.